Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to Quincy Carrier Live show where we talk about everything going on in the sports world this week. We're going to talk about if Kevin Stefanski and if Andrew Barry should be on the hot seat tonight. We're also going to talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers being 15-0. If you know me, if you followed me for a significant amount of time, you'll know, or maybe you don't know, I covered the Cavs too. So we're going to talk about both of those things going on, but we're going to start with Kevin Stefanski being on the hot seat. Is he on the hot seat? Should he be on the hot seat? Now, one of the things I talked about in my latest video that I uploaded to YouTube is this concept that Kevin Stefanski is a two-time coach of the year, and not a concept, but the idea that Kevin Stefanski is a two-time coach of the year, and that means that he should be protected from certain consequence. Now, I'm not one of these people who are going to throw away the fact that Kevin Stefanski is not just a two-time coach of the year. He is the only coach the Browns have hired since '99 to reach the playoffs twice. The only coach since Martin Schottenheimer to reach the playoffs twice. He is the most successful head coach that the Browns have had, not just since '99, but since Marty Schottenheimer. That's nothing to laugh at, right? Is it the success that we all want? No, we would want to get a little bit better than what Kevin Stefanski has been able to do the last 4 or 5 years. But it's definitely success that did not fall on the Cleveland Browns before Kevin Stefanski got here. The truth is that the Browns are better off with Kevin than they were without Kevin, at least the last 4 years. That is just true. But the question isn't, do I think Kevin Stefanski is justified on being in the hot seat? The question is he on the hot seat? Because there are good coaches who get fired all the time. I would argue if you name a legendary coach, like you can name a legendary coach in chat right now, right? Odds are that dude got fired. Like name a legendary coach, the coach Tom Landry got fired. Paul Brown got fired, right? No matter how good of a coach you are, eventually you're going to get fired. Eventually you're going to be on the hot seat. The question is what puts a coach on the hot seat, right? What is an appropriate thing that puts a good coach on the hot seat? And what's a thing that you can use to measure if a coach should or should not be on the hot seat? My thing is this. There are two things that gets a head coach fired consistently. Like if you go through the history books, you go through the active coaches right now, two things will always stand out that get coaches fired. Back-to-back disappointments when it comes to seasons. Kevin has not done that. Last year they went 11-6. That matters. So they're not coming off a back-to-back disappointing season. Now, if Kevin survives this season and then starts the next season 1-15 or something like that, yeah, he'll get fired mid-season next year because that's back-to-back disappointments. But if we're just talking about this season, Kevin has not had back-to-back disappointing seasons. This is probably the most disappointing season that Kevin has had, which brings me to the other thing that gets coaches fired. Having a win percentage under 300. That's the one that gets everybody. Bill Belichick got fired from New England, a place where I believe he won at least 3 Super Bowls with. No, 4, because Tom won 4 there, right? 4 or 3. Somebody correct me in the chat. Point is, Bill Belichick won 4 Super Bowls or 3 Super Bowls with the New England Patriots. He went under 300 in his win percentage one time. They fired him. Now, obviously, there were other things leading up. The back-to-back disappointments definitely added to that, right? But again, it doesn't matter who you are. Back-to-back disappointment, under 300 win percentage, it gets you canned. Andy Reid came off a back-to-back disappointing season and a sub 300 win percentage. By the way, for those of you who don't know, sub 300 win percentage is like less than 4 games when we played 16 and less than 5 games when we play 17. So that is what sub 300 means when I say that. That got Andy Reid fired, right? Going under 300 for his win percentage. Got him canned in not Kansas City, in Philadelphia. No coach is above it, right? And Kevin Stefanski, he does have some real accomplishments under his belt, especially in the context of being the Cleveland Browns head coach. There's no doubt about it. He's accomplished some things that a lot of guys have stepped into this building and not accomplished. Talented guys. Kevin has outdone them all. Even Bill Belichick. He was much better in Cleveland than Bill Belichick was in Cleveland. Right? We cannot act like or take lightly if the Browns fire Kevin Stefanski like we're just firing Freddie Kitchens or Mike Pettin or some dude who's never done nothing. No, you're firing a 2-time coach of the year. You're firing the most successful head coach this franchise has had since 99 and even going back before 99. That's who you're firing. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but it does mean that you got to take this thing ultra serious if you're the Cleveland Browns. And you have to be ultra sure that you think he is a part of the problem. That's the part of this that I don't think enough people are respecting, right? Whether you want to fire Kevin Stefanski, whether you don't, I think good arguments exist for doing both of those things, right? I think there's an excellent argument for not firing Kevin Stefanski. I think there's great arguments for firing him. I'm not decided on what I think the Browns should do. I have no clue. All I know is that it's got to be on the table. The team has a 200 win percentage, right? There's going to be a lot of people offering you answers right now. I'm just going to tell you this straight up. Don't nobody got no answers. Don't nobody know what the Browns about to do. The Browns don't even know what they about to do. So when somebody comes up here and tells you they got the answers, they know exactly. They don't know. They don't know. Nobody has the answers. All we know is this. Kevin has a sub 200 win percentage right now. In order to be 300 or better, he has to get to 5 wins this season. In order to get to 5 wins, you would have to win what? The Browns have 2. So 4 out your next 7. You have to go above 500 for the end of the year. And I promise you this. This is the one thing I do know. Maybe I should save this for when I record with Brad later this week on things I think I know. Shout out to them. Make sure you check that out if you haven't. But the one thing I do know, if the Browns do go 4-7, if the Browns do end the season with 6 wins or 5 wins somehow, yeah, Kevin keeping that job. If there's any shadow of doubt, I think they're going to lean towards keeping Kevin in charge. So if you're wondering what Kevin needs to keep his job or to have job security, he need to win 4 out of the next 7. He win 4 out the next 7. Ain't nobody going to say nothing to him. Promise you that. I promise you that. Because, yeah, that means you might be a struggling Miami Dolphins team or a struggling Cincinnati Bengals team. But also to get to that, you have to beat the Ravens, or you would have to beat the Chiefs or the Steelers. You get a couple upset victories, and then you finish the season. Well, in the Jameis games, you can legitimately say you went 5-5 with Jameis Winston. Oh, yeah, Kevin ain't got nothing to worry about if he wins 4 more games this season. It's going to be tough to do. The schedule's not easy. The Broncos are playing really good. Everybody's playing good on there. Even Cincinnati, who's been losing, they've still been playing good football. But if they get to 4 more wins, they get to 6 wins for the season, Kevin's job is going to be safe. I know that for a fact, just because I don't think that they're going to reach to fire Kevin. I think that it has to come down to 2 things. One, Kevin has to be under 300, and then also Mike Vrabel has to want to take the job. I think that's really the storm that brings it together. But if Kevin avoids going under 300, then that does matter. And the reason that matters is not just because, 6 wins is so great. Oh, yeah, that's not why that matters. The reason that matters is because it demonstrates something that Kevin Stefanski brings to the table. See, the thing about great coaches is they don't do much for your ceiling, right? Your ceiling is going to be determined by your players. That's always going to be the case. You're only going to be able to reach the ceiling that you want to reach to based on the players that you have. Look, Kyle Shanahan is the perfect example. They can't win a Super Bowl out there in San Francisco. Kyle Shanahan's the best coach in football. Like, or at least one of them. Right now, they 5-5 because their ceiling is created by their players. But the one thing a coach does have control on is your floor. See, good coaches, they have a floor that's much better than the bottom. And that is one thing a good coach is supposed to provide, is a floor. And if Kevin can get this team to 5 or 6 wins, you can get the 300%. You can legitimately say, hey, look, man, think about Kevin Stefanski. Look, even when the season goes bad, even when your starting quarterback tears his labrum and he can't throw the ball for the rest of the season, or your starting quarterback gets suspended for 11 games and you have to start Jacoby Brissett, or when your starting quarterback stinks and then you play Jameis Winston for the rest of the year. You could give Kevin Stefanski all that chaos. He's going to still get to that floor. You're going to still have a respectable record at the end of the day. It's not a great record. It's under 500, but it's not embarrassing. You're not the number 1 overall pick. He provides a floor. Good coaches provide a floor, and that floor is above 300 or 300 or better. That's the floor. That's what good coaches can get you to. And if Kevin provides that, okay, it was an off year with the good coach. The players didn't do what they were supposed to. We got to reshuffle, get younger in some places. But Kevin's a good coach. He gave us that floor. That's what that means if you're able to get to that number there. If you're not able to get to that number, then Kevin doesn't bring you that floor. Now, again, there's been 2 coaches that haven't reached that floor. Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan, ironically enough. Now, Kyle Shanahan did that in his second year, and that was the year where, like, everybody on the San Francisco 49ers got hurt. So there was an extenuating circumstance there. With Sean McVay, the year he went under 300, I think he came within a game, like legitimately like a half game of getting over 300. So like I think they were at 5 wins total, which is kind of just getting at 300. But even then, they had a ton of injuries that year, and that was like a year or 2 fresh off coming off a Super Bowl. He wasn't going to get fired. Extenuating circumstances. The question with Kevin is, hey, is Deshaun Watson an extenuating circumstance? The answer to that question lays within that building. Because if you're just asking me from outside the building, do I think Deshaun Watson is the extenuating circumstance? I think the answer is obviously yes. He stunk. He was so much worse than anybody expected him to be. And that led this season down a very dark path. That being said, even if you count Deshaun Watson as an extenuating circumstance, I think we do have to admit, you still want him to have an above 300 win percentage with at least Jameis Winston at the very least. Which still means that you have to go out there and win 2 more games, right? Jameis going to start 10 games for this team. You want to go out and win 3 out of those 10 games at the very least, if you're going with the floor argument. And again, if they were to get to like 6 wins, that would mean that the Browns would be 500 with Jameis, which is obviously very good. And then you can make the argument, we could be a good team next year. We could just add some things, start Jameis. You know the drill there. But the reason this lays within the building, the answer to this lays within the building is, yes, Deshaun Watson stunk this year. But internally, they are the only ones who know who was the driving force for bringing Deshaun in, who wanted to double down on building around Deshaun, who decided that once Deshaun was struggling to keep Deshaun out there. From the outside looking in, that answer could be anybody. And I've seen the finger pointed on this one, the whole Deshaun Watson thing, to literally everybody. I saw some dude the other day tell me that J.W. Johnson is the reason that like Deshaun Watson was traded for. Yes. The dude who introduces the jerseys, right? The team president, but not like on the football operation side. I've seen people suggest that it was J.W. Johnson that's responsible for all the stuff that we hated about the Deshaun Watson era. I've seen people suggest it was Paul DePodesta, that it was Andrew Berry. The most popular theory is that it was only Jimmy Haslam and D. Haslam and Jimmy Haslam and D. Haslam alone, and that Kevin Stefanski was reluctant to go along with it. And I've seen people postulate that it was Kevin that wanted it all along. We don't know which version of that is true, except for the J.W. Johnson one. We know that's not true, right? That one's crazy. J.W. Johnson, if you don't like him, I guess, but like, you know, he ain't had nothing to do with bringing in no damn Deshaun Watson. But point is, you can point the finger at anybody for why Deshaun Watson was here and why Deshaun Watson remained the starter once it became obvious that Deshaun Watson was not capable of playing starting football anymore. We don't know the answer to that. Internally, they do. So if your argument and your Kevin Stefanski is, well, you know, Deshaun blew up the season, but you were the one who pushed for Deshaun and you were the one who wanted to start Deshaun when he was struggling, then guess what? You don't get to use Deshaun Watson as an excuse. It's only if those things happen to you and you didn't have final say over it. Maybe you did a 3-man vote between Jimmy D, Andrew, and Kevin Stefanski. And you lost out that vote if you was Kevin. Or you and Andrew won the vote, but Jimmy overruled you, right? That's the only place, like, that's why I'm like, internally, that's the only people who gonna know who's truly responsible for how this season played out with Deshaun, because we don't know who made these decisions, because Deshaun's contract makes it that you can't just look at this and think it was exclusively a coaching call. Everybody else on the roster that make regular money, yeah, like those people, that's coach's call right there. But Deshaun Watson, well, you can't simply just bench him. You're going to have a conversation with the GM and the head coach and ownership and all of that. That's the question, truly, where this whole season lies with Kevin and if he'll get a pass for this season. If Kevin does not get to a 300 win percentage and somehow survives this season without getting fired, I think we have our answer. Kevin didn't really have much to do with Watson, not with him being brought in, or maybe he did have something to do with him being brought in, but he wanted to pull the trigger on it, pull the plug on it a little bit earlier than some people did, right? And he didn't get allowed to do that. So we'll find out the answer to that. But that's the only way Kevin survives a sub 300 win percentage. If he goes under 300 for the year and that's not the case, he's got to go. Because again, part of what you have a head coach for is to establish a culture. And that culture is good because the culture gives you a floor as a football team. And that floor means that you can only be but so bad. But if you break through that floor, then the culture's not there. And what's the whole point of the continuity if the culture is not there to be retained? Push come to shove, unless we find out that all the conspiracy theories are 100% true and that this was 1,000% a Jimmy Haslam force move from the start and end. And even if that's the case, like, I don't know, Jimmy going to have like the self-awareness enough to cut bait on this whole thing. I think if Jimmy's in charge and Jimmy's been making these decisions, that kind of concerns me a little bit more than if Kevin was making some bad decisions. Because if that's the case, hey, dog, what's to stop Jimmy from thinking that Deshaun Watson can still be redeemed? But that's a whole nother question for a whole nother day. Hopefully we never got to cross that bridge, because they trot him out there again. I don't know what the result would look like, but I'd be shocked if it looked great. Anyways, that's what Kevin Stefanski is supposed to bring to the table, right? Culture, a floor. He's supposed to establish you a floor. That's why we love Mike Tomlin. Mike Tomlin, don't ever get below 500. Now, look, we ain't expecting Kevin to be that. Most coaches don't do that. Every coach has a couple 300 seasons. It's fine. But you can't go below 300, right? You can't go below 300. That's what Kevin Stefanski should look to avoid. You ain't gonna survive 300. I look at that picture. It looks like I'm like one of those like thoughts. You know how they have it in the cartoons where like the thoughts be hovering over somebody's shoulder. I'm just like, hey, Kevin, you got to win some games, brother. You ain't gonna survive going under 300. It don't matter how many coach of the years you got. We've seen Super Bowl winning coaches, 3-time Super Bowl winning coach Bill Belichick get fired because of that. We've seen Doug Peterson, who won a Super Bowl like 2 years before he got fired. But you know why he got fired? He went under 300. Can't go under 300, especially when your team got expectations. Can't go under 3. It can get bad. You can have a down year, but you can't go under 300. That's the bar. I ain't make that bar up. That is literally, go through all these head coaches. You'll find that in common. Can't go under 300. So that's what Kevin has to look out for. He cannot go under 300. Now, because the temperature is so piping hot on the back of Kevin Stefanski, you know who's been kind of like sliding through all this? Andrew Berry. We really have not talked a ton about Andrew Berry's job security. And I think that's interesting because I don't think you're going to fire Kevin Stefanski and then just keep Andrew Berry and he hires another coach. Have you ever heard how Andrew Berry talks about Kevin Stefanski? I don't think it's fake. He calls him the next Andy Reid. So if you're asking Andrew Berry to make a decision on who you're going to bring in, you're definitely going to ask his input on who you should fire. And he's simply not going to recommend that you fire Kevin Stefanski under this circumstance. And if he's not going to recommend it, then he's probably going to have to go if you make the decision to fire Kevin Stefanski. So not only do we have to talk about, is Kevin somebody we should keep going forward, we should also talk about, is Andrew Berry somebody that you want to hang on to going forward? And this is a very complicated conversation to have, because the biggest thing sitting against Andrew Berry in his resume is something that we do not know how much responsibility he ultimately has at the end of the day. And it's that damn Watson trade. Again, I mentioned this when I was talking about Kevin. I'll mention it with Andrew Berry. We don't know who pounded the table to get Deshaun Watson here. And even then, right, like, I think it is a forgivable stance if for the Browns to have wanted to trade for Deshaun Watson. Now, I'm just talking about this from a football standpoint. If you want to argue from a moral standpoint, that's all good and well. I'm just saying from a football standpoint, this was something that was obviously justifiable at the time, right? The Browns weren't the only team that wanted to trade for Watson. There were so many teams that wanted to trade for Watson that there was a legitimate sweepstakes for the services of Deshaun Watson. Like, there were like 12 teams that came bidding. The Houston Texans then narrowed those 12 teams into 4 teams who can offer them what they wanted. That, again, that's how sought after Deshaun was at the time, that not only did 12 teams come a knocking, but also the Texans could just be like, nah, we don't want y'all. Y'all ain't got enough. That is how good how much value was placed on Deshaun Watson at the time. I know his play recently has made that hard to imagine, but we did live through it, right? When the Browns traded for Deshaun Watson, I got a text from some very prominent people and some people I respect in media telling me the Browns finally got a franchise quarterback. People who would never repeat those words today, but people who said that the second he got traded here, right? That is where Deshaun Watson was then. I understand why you traded for him. I don't blame anybody for making that move. Like, who initiated the push to get Deshaun? I don't know how much that matters. It's who decided to keep going once it was wrong. Like, once it was obvious that Deshaun was not going back to that level. And I would say that point of obvious was after the Commanders game. There was no way anybody would ever be convinced that that dude was going to look good this season. He was that bad against the Commanders. And he was that bad leading up to that game against the Commanders. He had 4 of the worst football games he had ever had in his life in this 2024 season. So who was the driving force behind that? Who was the driving force to bring him here? I don't know. I don't care. It made so much sense at the time. I'm not surprised if it was Kevin, Andrew, and Jimmy Haslam who thought it was a good idea at the time, at least from a football perspective. Because you know who else thought it was a good idea at the time from a football perspective? All of y'all. Everybody thought it was a good idea from a football perspective. The conversation had nothing to do with how good or bad your football team would be if you traded for Deshaun Watson. It was like, hey, man, is this something we actually want to do? Because look at what he's been accused of. That was the conversation with Deshaun Watson in 2020. People trying to retcon it, acting like the conversation was about his level of play. BS. Y'all thought he was going to be great. Everybody thought he was going to be great in 2020. He was coming off an MVP candidate year. We were wondering how long it would take for him to get to that level, how long he would get suspended for. But nobody assumed once Deshaun Watson got traded for the Cleveland Browns that he'd just be awful, right? So you'd be forgiven for making that move under that mindset at that time because that was a forgivable place to be at. That wasn't an outrageous, like it's not like the Browns were the only team that wanted to trade for Deshaun Watson and then made the move. That's not what happened at all. So they make the move. I'm not going to be too critical about how that move gets done. But once the move became rotten, about 4 weeks into the season, why didn't you make a move faster to get off of it? Who was behind that? Was that a Jimmy call? Was that an Andrew Berry call? Was that a Kevin Stefanski call? If it was Kevin Stefanski, he's going to get fired. And then by proxy, Andrew Berry. If it was an Andrew Berry call, he's going to get fired. If it was a Jimmy Haslam call, then everybody's safe. Right? Like when it comes to the whole Watson thing, everybody's safe. That is going to be one of the most important factors in figuring this out. How this season plays out, how they roll out this offseason, the decisions they make or don't make, they're going to tell you a lot about what went on from weeks 4 to 7. Right? Why there was still this push to not only keep Deshaun as the starter once it became obvious that he could not play starting quarterback in the NFL anymore, but also to reaffirm him in the media as a starter. Whoever was behind that push probably got to go unless it's the owner. And if it's the owner that made that push, and now since the Achilles injury happened, the owner no longer wants to make that push, then everybody's safe. But if it was like Andrew Berry being like, no, we're going to win this trade. We're going to keep playing Deshaun in there. All right, Andrew, you got to go. I do think it's interesting because if win percentages weren't a part of it, right? If Kevin didn't have such a bad record, I do think there's a world where like Kevin keeps his job, but Andrew doesn't. I don't think there's a world where Kevin gets fired, but Andrew doesn't. I'd be surprised. Maybe I'm just gearing myself up to be surprised. This whole season has been a surprise to me. So you know what? I wouldn't even be surprised if I was surprised at this point. But nonetheless, the Watson thing, right? That's the first thing you got to talk about when you talk about if Andrew Berry's on the hot seat. The question about how much he's responsible for, ultimately, don't none of us know. We all don't know. Everybody who say they know, they just guessing. Don't nobody know. The only people that know are Andrew Berry, are Kevin Stefanski, and are Jimmy Haslam and D. Haslam. Those people who know. Maybe the top lieutenants in the Browns organization know, but at the end of the day, that's who knows. Let's talk about Andrew Berry's work. Because outside of the Watson trade, we got to talk about his work. And again, this is difficult to evaluate because the draft does not get evaluated on a year-by-year basis. We don't look at the 2024 draft after the 2024 season and go, oh, nobody made the Pro Bowl. That draft stunk forever. That's not how it works. These players are not expected to do much in their first couple of years in the league, and then you judge them based on what they do 3-4 years out. Right now, we only have 3 drafts to look at for Andrew Berry. Let's look at the 2020 draft, right? The 2020 draft, the Browns select Jedrick Wills, 10th overall. That's a miss. I think there was a time where it felt like it was kind of okay that you drafted Jed Wills, but it wasn't the greatest choice you could have made. Now it looks like a miss. You look at all the offensive tackles that went in that class, you can argue you probably got the worst one that went in the first round at the very least. In the second round, you got Grant Delpit. That was a win. That was an absolute win. That's an extension-worthy player in the second round. That's one of your critical pieces on the defense. Grant Delpit, second-round pick, really good pick there by Andrew Berry. Then you get to day 3. Now, the bar for day 3 is significantly lower than the bar for day 1 or day 2. Day 1 or day 2, you want extension-worthy starters. Day 3, you're happy if a dude is still in the league after 4 years. Jordan Elliott, not the greatest third-round pick in the world, but he still plays. He got a second contract with the 49ers. It's a fine enough pick. I call it neutral. Jacob Phillips, not a great pick there at 97. Harrison Bryant in the 4th round, fine pick there. Was a starter for you, was a useful player for you for 4 years and still in the NFL. Nick Harris in the 5th round, that's a fine pick. Donovan Peoples-Jones, that's a pretty good pick there in the 6th round. So in the 2020 draft, of the day 3 guys, I think 3 out of the 5 that they selected were good. Of the day 2 guys that they selected, all one of them. Well, no, day 2 is round 2 and 3. So of the day 3 guys, Harrison Bryant, Nick Harris, Donovan Peoples-Jones, good job. That was a great day 3 for Andrew Berry. Day 2 guys, I thought that they did pretty good on everything except for Jacob Phillips. So 2 out of 3 there. Round 1, you swung and missed. Overall, it's like a C+ draft, 2020. All right, let's go to 2021. 2021 is an interesting year. In the first round, you get Greg Newsome. Now, Greg Newsome's not a swing and miss like Jed Wills. Greg Newsome is just okay. Like, it's a neutral pick. It's a first-round pick a lot of teams make. It's like, yeah, he's fine. He can start. He's not like the greatest player. He's not a superstar. He's also obviously not trash. Makes a couple plays, has made a couple of really big plays for the Cleveland Browns. Absolutely. It's not like you drafted, what's his name, Justin Gilbert? So, it's a neutral first pick. Like, he didn't become the heir apparent to Denzel Ward like you hoped. He didn't become your shutdown number 2 corner, but he's only not the number 2 corner because you hit on somebody bigger in next year's draft in Martin Emerson in the 3rd round, right? If that weren't the case, Greg Newsome would definitely be your number 2 corner, and you would be fine with Greg Newsome as your number 2 corner. I know people online don't like him, but he's a fine corner, right? So Greg Newsome, that's neutral. JOK, big hit for JOK. So round 1, you went neutral there. Round 2, you swung big and you hit big. You traded up for Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah and you hit big. You swung big in the 3rd round too with Anthony Schwartz. You missed. He stunk. He was bad. There's no redeeming that pick. It's a bad pick. Day 3, you draft James Hudson, Tommy Togiai, Tony Fields, Richie LeCounte, Demetric Felton. I would say James Hudson was worth the 4th round pick. Tony Fields was worth the 5th round pick. Everybody else, not really worth it. So 2 out of those 5. Overall, I would say you got JOK in this draft. Greg Newsome's not bad. I would say this is a C+ to a B- draft in 2021. And then the last draft that we could truly evaluate is 2022. Now, we'll look at the other 2 classes, the more recent ones, just to hover over them, but we're not going to make any determinations over 23 and 24 today because it's just too early. But let's look at 2022. You get Martin Emerson. Now, Martin's having a down year, but I believe he'll bounce back and be a really good player going forward. He'll be fine. That's a home run. Alex Wright looks like he'll be a solid player. So that's a good pick there. And again, all these are this is day 2. David Bell didn't work out. So if your day 2 picks, 2 out of 3 are fine. You get a home run with Martin Emerson. You're good. Day 3 picks. Perion Winfrey did not work out. Cade York did not work out. Jerome Ford as a 5th round pick. It's a neutral, right? Like, he provided about as much as you would expect from a 5th round pick. He got some moments, when he wasn't too great, right? Michael Woods, nope. Isaiah Thomas, 7th round pick. I guess you could call that a win, but like at this point, he was a 7th round pick. I call it neutral. It's not going to change how you feel about the draft. Dawson Deaton, 7th round pick. I haven't heard him since. You got Martin Emerson out this draft, and this is a draft class where you've had 3 top 100 picks, really 2 top 100 picks, because one of those picks was 99. I say this is you got Martin out of this. So a C draft. So draft history for Andrew Berry, it's not as bad as some people make it out to be, but it's also not as good as some people make it out to be, right? People act like Andrew Berry does nothing but hit homers. He's hit a couple of them, right? Like, you got some really good players. Greg Newsome is a fine player. JOK is a really good player. Grant Delpit is a really good player. Martin Emerson's going to continue to be a really good player once he gets his next season under his belt. He's struggling right now, but I believe him to be a pretty damn good player in the long run. Then we can just glaze over these next 2 drafts. 2023, Siaki Ika, and obviously that didn't work out. And that's the only one we can write off in 2023. Cedric Tillman is turning it around, so he might be worthwhile. DeJuan Jones has been pretty good for the team. Isaiah McGuire, day 3 pick, has been pretty good for the team. DTR, we'll see if he could be a backup. If he could be a backup, that's a win for a 5th round pick. Cam Mitchell, pretty good for a 5th round pick. Luke Whippler, we'll see next year once he gets a chance to play. But all of one pick from 2023 is still up for evaluation. And then everybody that you drafted that wasn't like in the 6th or 7th round is still up for evaluation in 2024. So there's not much to talk about there. Mike Hall does look good, but Mike Hall is on injured reserve right now, so we're not going to get to see him until the end of this season. So draft-wise, I think Andrew has been a solid drafter. It is worth noting that of the 3 draft classes that we went over, one of those were the ones where he didn't have a 1st-round pick. So it's not like I'm evaluating him strictly off of when he did not have a 1st-round pick. And you can argue the most disappointing picks that he's had are his 1st-round picks, which you don't love, right? But he's only had 2 1st-round picks to choose from since 2020, and it's not a big sample to pick from or to make determinations about. Another thing we want to look at with Andrew Berry is how well did he build bridges. Now, when I say bridges, I'm talking about the ability to go from one position player on an expiring contract to a new position player, right? How well did he bridge the gap between position players? That is something that you have to look at when it comes to Andrew Berry, and let's see how he did there. I have 5 position groups I think he did a good job bridging the gap with. Right tackle, DeJuan Jones, Jack Conklin, that's a good bridge. Wide receiver, they did a good job bridging that, right? Jerry Jeudy looks great. Cedric Tillman has looked great. I'm satisfied with the bridge they built to get them through getting rid of Amari Cooper. I think they did a good job building that bridge. Defensive back, they did so good at building that bridge don't even exist anymore. Greg Newsome not going to be here after his contract runs out because Martin Emerson is so good. And then you were excited about Cam Mitchell. They did a good job building that defensive back bridge. Linebacker bridge, they went from nothing to JOK. That's a good bridge to me. And then safety bridge, they did a pretty damn good job with the safety bridge. You like Ronnie Hickman, you can like Grant Delpit, D'Anthony Bell. They got a lot of good young bridge players there, or players who could start and be really good starters there. So that's 5 bridges I think he did a good job with. There's 3 bridges I'm not sure. Defensive line, I like Isaiah McGuire. I like Michael Hall, but it's way too early for me to determine that a win right now. So Alex Wright, right? He looked pretty good to start the season. He didn't play the whole season. So next year, I'll be able to determine that defensive line bridge a lot better. Interior offensive line bridge, this almost relies entirely on Luke Whippler and Zach Center. Both of those guys are too young to judge at this point. QB bridge, I think that starts this year. I think the Browns were under the impression they had a franchise quarterback the last few years, right, and reasonably so. Now that they know they don't have one, we'll see what bridge they build, and we'll judge that as that time comes. And then the non-existent or inefficient bridges or insufficient bridges that I think they have not done a great job. Running back, tight end, left tackle. Running back, I think they failed that position group as far as bridging it, simply because they did not spend any resources above a 5th round pick to fill that running back room up. They only drafted Jerome Ford. They did not swing on any other running backs when they should have. They didn't build a bridge there. They'll have a chance to build a bridge this offseason because this is a loaded running back class, but from 2020 on, they didn't do anything in running back. And I think knowing when you had Kareem Hunt and that wasn't a player you wanted to keep long-term, you should have drafted somebody with a 3rd round pick or something like that. A prospect that you felt very good about it being a starter a little bit earlier than 2025. Tight end bridge, I mean, do I have to explain it? Like, there's no heir apparent to David Njoku or even Jordan Akins right now. That's something that you're going to have to spend on this draft. And look, this draft, you're going to get fortunate. They have a bunch of tight ends and a bunch of running backs, but you didn't spend one there. Left tackle bridge. This is inexcusable to me because you had an opportunity to draft left tackle last year. Tons of opportunity to draft left tackle. Did not take any of those opportunities. Is what it is. No left tackle bridge being built there. So if we look at the bridges, 5 of them are fine. 3 of them are to be determined, and 3 of them are just flat bad bridges. We'll see. Overall, how do I feel about Kevin Stefanski? Not Kevin Stefanski, about Andrew Berry. I will say this. I think he's been a slightly above average general manager. I think his strength is in the stuff that doesn't show up when we do these kind of evaluations, right? His strength is in salary cap management. His strength is in trade manipulation, right? And trade outcomes. I think he's had a lot of good trade outcomes outside of Deshaun Watson. Again, we don't know who was the driving force behind that. I think he's really good at the technical stuff, but when it comes to the selecting of players, he is slightly above average. He's not amazing. He's not unfollowable, but he's not bad at it. Let's get into something real quick here, man. Do we have the ad read to pull up? Yes, we do. Let me pull up all of this stuff right here. All right. It's time for y'all. It's time for me to get in shape. This football season has been crazy on me. I haven't been able to get out there. Some of y'all see I'll be uploading on the CAVS channel. I'll be uploading here, sometimes multiple channel videos a day on both of these channels. It's very difficult, very difficult, very difficult. But thankfully, the OBR has recently introduced us to our new sponsors, Core Home Fitness. Look up our friends at Core Home Fitness. You can find them at corehomefitness.com and check out their assortment of lifting equipment and especially their top-rated adjustable dumbbells by the New York Times and Men's Health. Those are real publications. They're also rated a best buy by Consumer Reports. Check out their videos and products like the Glute Driver Plus and the Fight Master and Crush Your Goals in 2024. They got a US-based support team. That's awesome. Fast shipping, hassle-free returns. You name it, they know what they're doing. Again, check out corehomefitness.com, the ultimate in-home fitness equipment. They have stepped up to sponsor the OBR, and they rock. So if you like the OBR and you want to get in shape, you're looking for a home gym, this is the place where you can not just support us, but also support a business that supports the OBR. Feel free to check that website out. Thank you guys for listening to me as I tell you about corehomefitness.com. So we talked about Andrew Berry being on the hot seat. We talked about Kevin Stefanski being on the hot seat. Y'all want to talk about some damn joy? Y'all want to be happier? Y'all want to not be angry all the time? Well, I got the perfect thing for you. No, it's not another ad read. We talking about the Cleveland Cavaliers, baby. Do the sound effects work on here? Let's go. Let's talk about the Cavs. Yes, the Cavs. Yes. Much more fun to talk about the Cavs. Why? Because the Cavs haven't lost the game yet. If you are living under a rock or you haven't been paying attention, or maybe you don't think basketball is your thing, here's what you should know about the Cleveland Cavaliers. They're 15-0. They're off to the second best start in NBA history. They're playing excellent basketball. And they have a massive game on Tuesday. Now, I think it's important that we put in context just how important this Cavs game versus the Boston Celtics is, but also not get so carried away in talking about how fun it's going to be to watch the Cavs play one of the most meaningful regular season games of the week, to not fall into the trap of putting all of our eggs in this one basket, which is beating the Boston Celtics on Tuesday. Would it be fun if the Cavs beat the Boston Celtics on Tuesday? Yes. Would it mean that the excitement for the Cavs would ratchet up a significant level if they were able to beat the Boston Celtics on national TV? You betcha. I guarantee it. The excitement will be palpable if the Cavs do it. But does this mean that you crash out if the Cavs don't beat the Boston Celtics? Does this mean that you throw out all your Cavs merch and say the season's a fraud because the Cavs lose to the Boston Celtics? No, it does not mean that. We hope to see a competitive game. We hope to see the Cavs win a competitive game versus the Boston Celtics. But ultimately, the outcome of this game will just be the outcome of one game out of 82. So while I'm going to talk about why I think this game is important, it's important to remember that we should not put all of our eggs in the basket of beating the Boston Celtics, or at least right now. Now, in the playoffs, obviously that's the case, but we're not in the playoffs. We're in November. But I do think, regardless of that, it's still important that the Cavs show up this week versus the Boston Celtics. And I do think winning a game versus Boston does demonstrate something to not just the rest of the league or the national media, right? Which, by the way, if the Cavs do beat the Boston Celtics on Tuesday or today, depending on when you're watching this video, yes, we will do our victory laps. Yes, we will dunk on some of the people nationally who've been doubting us. But again, it doesn't mean the Cavs have won the NBA finals or anything like that, right? Like, we're not under that delusion. But it would be important for the Cavs to know that they can beat the Boston Celtics. Basketball is about a lot of things: size, ability, talent, we know. But another thing that basketball, or at least is a big part of basketball, is confidence. You want your best players to go into every game that they play knowing and feeling like they can win. Not if everything goes right, we can win. Not if we play perfect, we can win. No, it's just straight up. If we play a game and they play their game, we can beat them. You want your team to have that confidence coming into the season, coming into any series that they play, right? What I did not love about the last year's Cavs team is that they ran up against that New York roadblock, and up until this season, they never got through it. Like, they didn't do well against the Knicks in the regular season after that series. They didn't do well against the Knicks, period, until this year, where they blew out the Knicks. The Cavs need to make sure that no matter how this season plays out, they don't create a mental hurdle for themselves. They don't let a Boston beat them 4 times this season. They don't let anybody beat them 4 times this season. They don't let anybody get the idea that they have the Cavaliers numbers or have the edge on the Cavaliers if they played them in a series. That is what this is about. Is about proving to yourself, if you're the Cavs, that you're on Boston level, because your record says you are. But that's different than feeling like you're on Boston's level, right? That matters. Think about what happened in the NFL this week, right? The Buffalo Bills beat the Chiefs, and now everybody feels like the Bills are on the Chiefs level. The Bills feel like they're on the Chiefs level. It matters, right? And in the NBA, right now, the top dog is the Boston Celtics. That's who won the championship last year. That's who's been the king of the East the last couple of years. That's who it is. This is important. This is a big game. Also, for a team that's trying to maintain a lot of the momentum that they've built up, this is how you maintain that momentum, right? By winning games that you get your fan base excited for, by rewarding your fan base for being excited by winning. This is what carries on that positive momentum. This is what keeps away a lot of that negativity that some people default to, where they're like, oh, they're not real. They haven't beat these big teams, all of that and this and that. This is how you reward a fan base for sticking through what was a rough season last year. Even though the record wasn't terrible, the Cavs had a rough go of it last year, right? The ride wasn't super fun with the Cleveland Cavaliers in 2023. But the ride has been fun so far with this team. Now, it's going to be tough. I don't know who's going to be healthy for the game. Last time they played, they did not have Donovan Mitchell. We don't know if Donovan Mitchell is going to be healthy for this game. We don't know who's going to be available for this game, right? Even Darius Garland sat out a little bit against the Hornets. You didn't have Isaac Okoro. That's an ankle. You don't think he's probably going to be back. Dean Wade. So you're not 100% healthy going into this game. And if that stops you from beating Boston, I think nobody's going to be upset at you. But, you know, if you put up a fight, I think everybody will be okay with it. But the question about the Cavs beating Boston is about them proving it to themselves that they belong, that they are a team that even if they're going through something, can put a fight up with the best team in the NBA, that they belong in that conversation. Now, they already beat the Warriors, who were one of the best defenses. And it's important to remember, the Warriors came in there with like the second best defense in the NBA, and the Cavs put 80 on them in like the first half or something crazy like that. They beat them by like almost 40 points. This Cavs team's no joke. If you've been watching them, you would know. But a lot of people haven't been watching them. And this is their chance to let them know, right? So what the Cavs want to let them know, they definitely got to beat the Boston Celtics. And how are the Cavs going to be able to do this? They have offensive versatility. They have defensive versatility. That is the biggest difference that I saw in this Cavs team to last year and this year, is the versatility, is the ability to make adjustments, right? If Kenny Atkinson has brought anything other than his offense, which obviously works if you watch it, but also what I think Kenny Atkinson has brought to this table when it comes to the Cavs is those adjustments. The Cavs make adjustments now. Like I saw them when they were playing the Hornets switch to a zone in the middle of the game. And I remember thinking, JB would never adjust. Like the problem with JB was that he refused to just outright, straight up refuse to adjust at times. It would drive you crazy with JB. But with with Atkinson in there, he's making those adjustments. And I think what's interesting about Atkinson making those adjustments is how he got it. Somebody wrote an article on SB Nation about how Max Strus brought over some of the zone defense that he used to run with Miami and taught it to the Cavs. And I was like, one, that's a hell of a coach that understands their players' strengths to a point to where they're willing to empower them. And I think that's also like the big thing behind Kenny Atkinson and the change, just how well he's empowered these guys, right? Evan Mobley, he's given them, like, he's like the dude from Wizard of Oz. You know, the Wizard of Oz, like the whole point of the story is that like through the journey that they were actually just giving these guys something to empower them instead of like the actual thing that was asking for. So like the lion was cowardly, so you wanted to give him courage. I know it's very cool to reference the Wizard of Oz on the basketball channel, but hear me out. I'm going somewhere with this. But on the Wizard of Oz, like the lion needed courage, and like he acted like he gave the lion courage, but at the end of the day, the lion gave himself the courage because he was empowered to be courageous at the time, right? And so on and so forth, right? With everybody else in that story. And that's kind of what Kenny Atkinson is. He's kind of like the Wizard of Oz when it comes to this, because he's not doing anything to change who these players are. He's just empowering them to be a unabridged version of who they are, right? With Evan Mobley, he says, hey, I'm going to empower him by giving him the ball. With Darius Garland, I'm going to empower him by allowing him to facilitate freely, right? Like, he has empowered these guys. Max Strus, he's injured right now. How does Kenny Atkinson empower him? Let me let him teach the Heat's defense to this team. The adjustments, the versatility of this team, the fact that this team, again, had 4 players go over 20 points. That is the stuff that I feel like makes you an actual contender to beat a very dominant team like the Boston Celtics. How it goes, we will see. But I can't say that I'm not excited. We got some time for questions. So let's get some questions on the screen. I think we talked a lot during this show. So let's throw some questions up on screen if we got any, man. Would I bring Winston back? That's an interesting question. Jameis Winston, do you bring him back? Is Jameis Winston somebody worth bringing back? It depends on what the plan is for the draft. If you feel like you're going to go into this draft and you're going to draft the quarterback, then I don't know if Jameis Winston is the bridge guy that you want to bring in. I would rather just start Jacoby Brissett, knowing Jacoby Brissett is going to be overtaken, than Jameis Winston, right? I think Jameis Winston is in a weird spot as a backup quarterback because I think he's too good to just be the backup, right? Because he's good enough to justify playing at all times. If you switch to a rookie, you want somebody who's going to be able to be supportive and also not popular enough or not that people don't want to see play enough on the team, at least, that it becomes a distraction for the quarterback itself. Like, I think Joe Flacco backing up Anthony Richardson is a huge mistake because people are going to want him to play. And that turned out to be a huge mistake for the Colts. So if you draft the quarterback, I would rather get somebody who's going to command a little bit less attention and just go out and get Jacoby Brissett or something like that. If you're not going to draft the quarterback, then yeah, Jameis makes sense because it's probably the best quarterback you can get without having to trade for. Let's get another question up here if we could. Mike says, what GM is going to want to come here with the Watson contract handicap? From the outside looking in, that's going to be a difficult situation to ask somebody to step into. And I think that's why Andrew has a chance to be able to kind of get away with it, right? I think that's why Kevin had, like, the Watson thing being as bad and as weird as it was, kind of gives people a pass for this season. I don't know how far that pass goes, but yeah, I mean, like, this Watson contract thing, nobody who didn't create it is going to want to be a part of it. Like, it's not impossible to dig yourself out of it, but why would anybody volunteer to do that work? Like, you might as well let Andrew Berry do that work, which is only going to last like a year or two, right? Like, to get out the Watson contract, we're probably talking about like by the 2026 offseason, you could probably just wipe your hands of it with one clean cut. So we got a next question. Rob says, what assistant coaches are on the hot seat? You know what's funny about that question, Rob? The one coach that we assume is on the hottest seat, Ken Dorsey, probably doing the best job out of all the assistant coaches right now. Right. Like the offense has been moving since he's been made the offensive coordinator. Even against the Chargers, we found out was an elite defense when we played them. You saw what they were able to do for half the game at least versus Cincinnati. So I don't know if Ken Dorsey, like performance-wise, he shouldn't be on the hot seat. I just think he's on the hot seat because he's just not, he was brought in to do something that I don't know if they want to do anymore, which is to get the most out of a veteran quarterback. I don't know if Ken Dorsey's the type of offensive coordinator you want around with the rookie, you know, like I don't think his stuff works with a non-veteran quarterback. So that's why he's on the hot seat. Performance-wise, I mean, Jameis is balling like 400 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's not playing badly. Bubba Ventrone got to go. Like, I think that's been clear. Like, it's as clear as Joe Woods was in 22. This ain't working out. And then Jim Schwartz is having a down year. I think Jim Schwartz can be redeemed, though, right? Like, he's had down years before. So I don't think this is like they figured out Jim Schwartz. Jim Schwartz been in the league. He's had good years, bad years. This is just a down year for Jim Schwartz. And I think it's just more of a down year for the defense. Miles didn't start the season healthy. Then the season went into the can. And then as that happens, your defensive effort goes down. And also you had injuries, right? JOK not being out there really hurt you. So the one assistant coach I'm pretty sure is probably going to be gone is Bubba Ventrone because he's the one who's objectively done the worst job. Do we have any more questions before we switch the keys off here? Rocky Balboa. I wonder if that's your real name, Rocky Balboa. Would a Trevor Lawrence retread be at all possible since he seems to be losing favor in Jacksonville? Sure. Right? Anything is possible. Would I be a fan of the Trevor Lawrence retread? Probably not. I think Trevor Lawrence is like, back in the day, there used to be a class of quarterback that made sense pay-wise, like a middle class of quarterbacks, because you knew that they were capable of good things, but not all the time. But since Trevor Lawrence had some of that draft hype, so much draft hype, I don't think anybody's ever going to see him in a proper light. But I think the truth about Trevor Lawrence is he's kind of a similar quarterback to Baker Mayfield, where he's going to have some good weeks. He's going to have some bad weeks. He's just inconsistent. And I don't think Trevor Lawrence is ever going to be what everybody thought he would be coming out of Clemson. I know that he's not been in the greatest of situations, and you could blame the Jaguars for a lot of it, but an inconsistent player is an inconsistent player. And I think we're just, because he has that draft hype coming out of Clemson, we see his inconsistent players showing flashes, but I think it's just he's inconsistent at the end of the day. Trevor's not a consistent quarterback, and he's getting paid like a franchise quarterback, so I would want to stay away from it from that standpoint. But if you find a way to get Trevor on a lower deal, then I think it would make sense as long as you understand that he's inconsistent and not your end game at quarterback. Any more questions? All right. So we've had a fun hour here on Quincy Carrier Live. I want to thank everybody who showed up. I know it's not the funnest time in the world to talk Browns, but I think there's a lot of important stuff to talk about and to pay attention about going forward. So we'll see how the rest of this year goes. We'll see if Kevin gets to that magic over 300 number to be able to keep his job, in my opinion. But this isn't the only time that you're going to talk about the Browns with me. We're going to talk about the Browns plenty, but this isn't the only show that's going to talk about the Browns tonight. So if you want to continue the conversation, we got a show coming on right now. Fred and Barry are going to take it over from me now.